She called his armor a joke. Then he took it off and the hall fell quiet. The towering windows above him let in streams of pale light, casting long shadows on the polished marble floor. The hall was a place of grandeur, with flags from countless alien civilizations hanging from the ceiling, their symbols a silent testament to the power of their races. Today, humanity was here to join them. The peace negotiations between the Zarathian Empire and the human delegation had been long awaited. The Zarathians were a powerful alien species, known for their advanced technology and military strength. Yet, despite their reputation, humanity had managed to secure a seat at the table. Rylan was proud of what humanity had achieved, but his pride didn't stop the sense of unease that gnawed at him. He wasn't here to argue politics or make speeches. He was here to represent humanity's strength, and that strength was symbolized by the battle-worn armor he wore. His armor was heavy, made of hardened steel plates that bore the marks of countless battles. The helmet had a dent from a direct hit in the war with the Zithar raiders, and the chest plate was cracked from a near-death experience on the icy world of Glyxis. Yet, despite its age and imperfections, the armor was a symbol of humanity's resolve. It was a reminder that they had survived against all odds. The alien delegates stood in small groups, whispering amongst themselves. Rylan could hear the murmurs, some in admiration, others in clear derision. His armor, though sturdy and practical, looked old-fashioned next to the sleek, futuristic designs of the Zarathian uniforms. But that didn't bother him. He knew that the appearance of the armor was less important than what it represented. A sudden shift in the atmosphere caught Rylan's attention. The Zarathian princess, Zira, was making her way toward the front of the hall. She moved with an air of authority, her dark purple skin shimmering under the artificial lights. Her long, flowing silver hair was bound in an intricate braid, and her eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto Rylan as she approached. Rylan had heard of Princess Zira. She was known for her beauty, her cunning, and her ruthless ambition. Her reputation preceded her, and though he respected her power, he was not intimidated. He had faced worse threats than a princess with a sharp tongue. As Zira reached the center of the hall, she paused, her gaze sweeping over the human delegates. She spotted Rylan and with a smirk walked toward him. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and loud enough for everyone to hear. "Well, well," Zira said, her eyes lingering on Rylan's armor. "It seems the human race is still stuck in the past." She chuckled softly. "Is this what you call defense?" A few of the delegates snickered, their eyes darting between Rylan and Zira. The mocking tone in her voice was unmistakable. Her words were not just an insult to the armor, but to everything it represented. Humanity's struggle, their sacrifices, and their survival. Rylan didn't flinch. He stood tall, his face betraying no emotion. He had faced insults before from aliens and humans alike. But he knew this was more than just a personal insult. It was a challenge to everything humanity stood for. Zira took another step closer, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Tell me, Captain, how do you fight in that relic? Does it come with a manual on how to survive in the 21st century? Her laughter was sharp, echoing through the hall. The room grew quiet, and Rylan felt the weight of every eye on him. The alien delegates were watching, waiting to see how he would respond. Some were curious, some entertained, and some seemed eager to see him fail. Zira, sensing the moment was hers, took a step back and addressed the entire hall. "Surely, we all know that in the galaxy, strength is measured by technology, by power. This," she gestured to Rylan's armor, "is nothing more than a joke." Rylan's hand twitched slightly at his side, but he didn't reach for his weapon. Instead, he straightened his posture and allowed the silence to hang for a moment. He knew Zira's words were meant to provoke, but he wasn't about to let her make a fool of him in front of the entire room. He spoke calmly, his voice carrying across the hall. "You may think my armor is a joke, Princess, but it has kept me alive when the odds were stacked against me. It represents more than just metal and leather. It represents humanity's will to survive." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. "It's not the armor that makes the soldier. It's the soldier who makes the armor powerful." The hall was still. Zira narrowed her eyes, clearly displeased by his response. She was used to seeing others cower or retaliate when she made her pointed remarks, but Rylan's calmness seemed to frustrate her. "You think you can survive just by wearing a piece of metal?" she asked, her voice dripping with disbelief. "You think this," she pointed again to his armor, "is what makes you strong?" Rylan didn't answer her immediately. Instead, he took a step forward, causing the crowd to part slightly. The alien delegates exchanged nervous glances, sensing that something was about to happen. Zira's gaze never left him, her face a mixture of amusement and disdain. If you truly believe that, then perhaps you should take it off and show us all the strength that lies beneath. Or are you too afraid to be seen for what you really are? The challenge was clear, and Rylan could feel the pressure building. The room was waiting for him to either accept or back down. He had faced the same choice countless times in battle, stand firm or give in. And for Rylan, there was no question. Without a word, Rylan reached up and began to unfasten the straps of his helmet. The action was slow, deliberate. One by one, the plates of his armor came off, revealing the worn and battle-scarred body beneath. His arms, though strong, bore the marks of years of combat. His face, though handsome in its own right, showed the wear of countless sleepless nights and hard-fought battles. Zira's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something, respect perhaps, crossing her features. She hadn't expected him to comply. But still she couldn't allow herself to show weakness. She stood tall, her arms crossed as she watched him. As Rylan took off the last of the armor, the hall fell completely silent. Every eye in the room was fixed on him, and for the first time, Zira's confidence wavered. She had challenged him, but now she wasn't sure what to make of what she saw. The room remained still for several long seconds, the only sound the soft echo of Rylan's footsteps as he stepped away from the discarded armor. He didn't look at Zira, nor did he look around the room. He simply stood tall, letting his presence fill the hall. Zira was speechless, for the first time since entering the room. She had called his armor a joke, but now she saw the strength that lay beneath it, the strength of a man who had faced the worst of the galaxy and survived. And in that moment, Rylan knew one thing for certain. It wasn't the armor that made him strong. It was the unbreakable spirit that lay within him, and that no alien could ever take away. The silence in the hall stretched on, the weight of the moment hanging heavily in the air. Princess Zira stood motionless, her eyes still locked on Captain Rylan, who now stood before her without his armor, his chest bare and his face calm, yet filled with the quiet strength of a man who had lived through countless battles. The alien delegates who had been watching in anticipation now seemed uncertain. Some exchanged glances, unsure of how to react. Rylan, however, did not wait for them to form an opinion. He could feel their stares, but he wasn't concerned with how they viewed him. He had already proven something far more important. Zira, though momentarily taken aback by his boldness, quickly regained her composure. She was a princess, after all, trained to maintain control in any situation. Still, the fact that Rylan had dared to accept her challenge, and the way the room now seemed to be leaning toward him, was starting to gnaw at her pride. The princess cleared her throat, taking a step forward. "You may have removed your armor, Captain," she said, her voice steady, though there was an undercurrent of something less certain. "But you've only proven one thing: you're not afraid of me. You've shown us nothing that proves humanity's worth." Rylan didn't respond immediately. He could see the irritation in her eyes, but there was something else, a flicker of respect that had been absent earlier. It was subtle, but it was there. "We don't need armor to show our worth," Rylan said, his voice strong but not boastful. "Humans don't fight because they have the best technology or the strongest armor. We fight because we believe in something, because we can't back down from what's right." Zira's lips tightened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she gestured to the alien delegates standing near the perimeter of the hall. "We will see if your ideals are as strong as you claim, Captain. Let's see if humanity truly has what it takes." Rylan raised an eyebrow, but he didn't take the bait. The princess wanted to see him fail. That much was clear. But her challenge was also an opportunity, a chance to show the galaxy what humanity was truly capable of. Before he could respond, a loud noise from the hallway interrupted the tension. A booming crash echoed through the hall, followed by shouts and the sound of metal clashing. The delegates tensed, their hands instinctively reaching for weapons that were already concealed under their clothing. Zira's eyes flashed, and she motioned toward the door. "Stay here," she ordered, her voice commanding. "I will investigate." But as she turned to leave, Rylan moved faster. "I'm coming with you," he said, his tone firm. Zira's gaze flicked toward him, her expression unreadable. For a brief moment, she seemed to weigh her options. Then, without a word, she led the way toward the door. Rylan followed, his boots echoing against the marble floor. They moved quickly through the corridors of the grand hall, the sound of commotion growing louder with every step. Ryland's senses were sharp, his military training kicking in. He could hear the footfalls of soldiers running, the clatter of equipment, and the raised voices of confusion. As they turned the corner, they saw the source of the chaos. A group of rebels, clad in black armor and carrying advanced weaponry, were trying to break into the chamber where the peace talks were being held. They had breached the security checkpoints, and now they were forcing their way through the hall. Zira's eyes narrowed. "Traitors," she muttered under her breath. The rebels were an extremist faction, determined to sabotage the peace talks at any cost. And now they were making their move. Ryland could see the fear in the eyes of the alien delegates, but he didn't let it sway him. The rebels were well armed, but they were also disorganized. They had come for chaos, not a fight. And that was something Ryland could use to his advantage. "We need to act fast," Ryland said, his voice low but urgent. "They're after the delegates. If they get to them, there's no telling what will happen." Zira, surprisingly, didn't hesitate. "We fight them back," she said simply. "But we do it my way." Without another word, she grabbed a weapon from one of her guards, a sleek, energy-based rifle. Ryland watched as she expertly checked the weapon, her confidence in her skill evident. He wasn't used to seeing the princess like this, serious, focused, and ready for action. Ryland was about to say something when the first of the rebels spotted them and opened fire. A blast of green energy surged through the air, but Ryland was already moving. He dove behind a pillar, narrowly avoiding the shot. Zira was quick to return fire, her shots accurate and swift. "We need to clear the hall," Ryland shouted as he peeked around the pillar. He could see the rebel group forming up, preparing to advance toward them. The energy blasts were relentless, and the walls of the corridor were starting to show signs of damage. "Follow my lead," Zira ordered, her voice filled with authority. "We'll take the left flank. You handle the right." Ryland nodded, ready for action. He couldn't afford to think about the consequences of failure. There was no time for that. All that mattered now was the fight. The two of them moved in sync, covering each other's movements as they flanked the rebels. Ryland's years of military experience kicked in as he assessed the situation. The rebels were disorganized, but they had numbers and firepower on their side. He needed to use their overconfidence against them. Zira's rifle blazed in the air as she fired at one of the rebels who had tried to take cover behind a large crate. Ryland was quick to follow up, taking out another rebel who was attempting to flank them from the other side. The two worked like a well-oiled machine, their movements precise and deliberate. The tide of the battle shifted in their favor as the rebels began to falter. They weren't used to facing such coordination, especially from two individuals who didn't rely on advanced technology or overwhelming firepower. Ryland's strength wasn't in his armor or his weapons. It was in his ability to think quickly and adapt to the situation. Minutes later, the last of the rebels were subdued. The hall was quiet again, but the damage had been done. Several delegates had been injured in the chaos, but there were no fatalities thanks to their swift response. Zira wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead, her eyes scanning the now silent hall. For the first time since their confrontation, she looked at Ryland differently. He had proven himself, not just as a soldier, but as a leader. "You were right," Zira said, her voice almost begrudging. "You don't need armor to prove your strength." Ryland gave a nod, his expression serious. "It's not about the armor, it's about doing what's necessary to protect those who can't protect themselves." Zira didn't respond right away. She simply looked at him, a newfound respect in her gaze. The tension that had hung between them earlier seemed to have dissipated. "We have more to discuss," Zira said, her tone still firm but less dismissive. "But I believe we've learned something today." As they turned to return to the peace talks, Ryland couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Humanity had faced a challenge, and once again proven that their strength didn't lie in advanced technology. It lay in their ability to endure, to fight, and to stand together when it mattered most. The rebel attack had been swift, but humanity had proven its strength once again. The hall, once filled with tension and mockery, now stood quiet as the last of the rebels were taken down. Zira, still catching her breath, lowered her weapon. She surveyed the damage. The hall's once pristine walls were now scarred by blast marks, and several delegates lay injured or shaken. But there were no casualties, thanks to the quick actions of Ryland and the princess. Ryland stood beside her, his eyes scanning the room. His body ached from the fight, but he didn't let it show. The rush of adrenaline was fading, and with it came the weight of what had just transpired. The peaceful negotiations, once so simple in theory, had now been tested in the heat of battle. Zira turned to him, her expression no longer one of mockery or challenge. There was something different in her gaze, respect, maybe even admiration. She hadn't expected humanity to be so resilient, so capable. And now she found herself wondering just how much she had underestimated the human race. "You saved my life," Zira said quietly, her voice filled with a quiet awe. "And in doing so, you've proven that your species is capable of far more than I gave you credit for." Rylan didn't respond immediately. He wasn't looking for praise, he was only doing his duty. But the words were unexpected, coming from a princess who had once mocked him for wearing outdated armor. He nodded, acknowledging her gratitude, but his mind was already elsewhere. The battle was over, but the negotiations weren't. "We need to finish what we started," Rylan said, his tone firm. "The talks, the peace, it can't end like this." Zira nodded, her expression hardening once more. "You're right, we still have much to discuss." But the terms have changed now. The delegates who had been hiding or fleeing during the battle were slowly emerging from their hiding places. Some were visibly shaken, their faces pale with fear. Others seemed in disbelief that the fight was already over. They had expected chaos to tear apart the fragile peace that had been formed, but now they saw a different side of humanity, one that could stand its ground and defend itself when necessary. As the alien leaders gathered around, Rylan noticed the change in their demeanor. They no longer looked at him with scorn or mockery. There was a new respect in their eyes, even if they didn't openly acknowledge it, and he could see it in Zira's eyes, too. She had come into this meeting thinking of humans as little more than a nuisance, but now she was seeing them as something far more dangerous, capable of both diplomacy and strength in equal measure. "We should continue," Rylan said, his voice steady. "Let's finish the peace talks. There's still work to be done." Zira studied him for a moment, her lips pressed together in thought. Finally, she spoke. "I'll lead the way," she said, her voice clear. "But I will not make peace with those who do not show strength. Humanity has shown its strength today. Now, let's see if we can find common ground." The delegates moved back into position, and the atmosphere in the hall shifted. The tension from earlier had not completely vanished, but there was a sense of something new, an understanding that humanity wasn't here to be dismissed or bullied. They were here to make their mark, to carve out a place among the stars. Zira took her place at the head of the table, and the delegates took their seats. Rylan, standing off to the side, watched as the princess began speaking. Her words were measured now, not the mocking tone she had used earlier, but a tone of authority and purpose. She addressed the gathered leaders with respect, acknowledging the human contribution to the defense of the peace talks and shifting the focus back to the negotiation at hand. Rylan's thoughts drifted as he listened to the princess. She was skilled, no doubt. But he knew that the future of humanity didn't lie in her hands alone. It rested with everyone in that room, with the decisions they would make in the coming hours. Zira's words began to fade as he thought back to the fight, to the way everything had unfolded. The rebels, desperate and unorganized, had underestimated humanity's ability to respond. They had expected a quick victory, but instead they had been met with determination. It wasn't the weapons that had made the difference, it was the spirit of those who fought. The refusal to give up, to back down in the face of overwhelming odds, that was what made humans strong. Rylan glanced at the delegates. Some still looked uneasy, but most had regained their composure. The battle had been unexpected, but it had also shown them something they hadn't anticipated. Humanity wasn't just a species to be pitied. They were a force to be reckoned with. As the talks resumed, Rylan remained quiet, his mind still processing the events that had just transpired. Zira, who had once looked down on him, was now leading the conversation with a calm authority, no longer dismissing humanity's strength but recognizing it. That was the true victory of the day, the shift in perception. Zira paused mid-sentence, her eyes shifting to Rylan. "Captain," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "it seems we have underestimated humanity. You've proven that your species does not just survive, it thrives." The room fell silent once more. The delegates exchanged glances, and Rylan could see that his presence had altered the course of the discussion. Zira, ever the strategist, had shifted her approach, acknowledging the human contribution to the security of the talks. The alien leaders, once skeptical, were now taking humanity's position seriously. Rylan nodded, but he didn't speak. He wasn't here to take credit for what had happened. He was here for something greater, the future of humanity in a galaxy that had long considered them insignificant. They had a seat at the table now, and that was something to be proud of. As the day wore on, the talks continued. The atmosphere had changed, though the tension was still there. But now it was different. Now humanity had earned its place in the conversation. By the time the negotiations were nearly over, Rylan could feel the shift in the room. The Zarathians had come to the table expecting to deal with a race that was no more than a nuisance. They had expected easy negotiations, an easy victory, but instead they were leaving with something unexpected, a new respect for humanity. Rylan didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in a long while, he felt that humanity had a chance to prove that they were more than just survivors. They were warriors, diplomats, and leaders in their own right. And as the final words of the peace agreement were spoken, Rylan couldn't help but smile. The peace talks had been a success, not just because of the agreement that had been reached, but because humanity had proven itself. They had shown the galaxy that they weren't just here to survive, they were here to thrive. The final words of the peace talks were spoken, and for the first time since humanity had arrived on the scene, Rylan could sense a quiet calm in the hall. The tension that had once filled the air, the kind that had made it impossible to breathe, had now dissipated. The delegates of both the Zarathian Empire and humanity had reached an agreement, and the fragile peace that had seemed so far away now seemed within their grasp. The last few hours had been intense. The rebels' attack had disrupted the proceedings, but it had also brought an unexpected clarity. Humanity had shown the galaxy that it wasn't a race to be overlooked. It wasn't just about the technology they used or the strength of their warriors. It was about something far more fundamental, their spirit. Rylan stood at the back of the room, his eyes fixed on the delegates as they signed the peace agreement. He had been part of the conversation, of course, but now he found himself reflecting on the journey that had led them here. This moment, this agreement, was more than just a political victory. It was a victory for humanity's place in the galaxy. Zira, standing beside him, had been instrumental in the negotiations. Her leadership had been decisive, but Rylan could see that something had changed in her. The princess who had once mocked him for his armor, for humanity's outdated methods, was now standing with a quiet sense of respect. She hadn't just accepted humanity's place in the galaxy, she had come to understand it. Rylan didn't need to speak. The change was clear in the way Zira conducted herself. The mocking tone she had once used had been replaced by a more thoughtful, reflective approach. She no longer saw humanity as a threat to her empire's dominance, but as a partner, someone who could bring something to the table that even the greatest of alien civilizations couldn't ignore. As the final signatures were placed on the peace agreement, the room fell silent. The delegates from both sides looked around, as if unsure of how to react. For them, this was the moment that defined the future. Humanity had earned a seat at the table, but more than that, it had earned the respect of the most powerful alien races in the galaxy. Rylan felt a sense of accomplishment, but he didn't let it cloud his thoughts. This peace was fragile. It wasn't the end of the journey, but the beginning. The galaxy was still filled with dangers, more powerful species, more factions that sought to disrupt the order. But humanity had proven that it could stand against any challenge, that it could face the unknown with resolve. Zira, having signed the agreement, turned to face Rylan. Her expression was softer now, her once stern features softened by the gravity of the moment. She reached out her hand, and though it was a simple gesture, it carried the weight of something far deeper. "Captain Rylan," she said, her voice steady, "I was wrong about you. And I was wrong about your people." Her eyes met his, and for the first time, Rylan saw genuine respect in her gaze. "I underestimated humanity's strength, its spirit. You've proven that there's more to you than meets the eye, and for that I offer my sincerest apology." Rylan looked at her hand, then into her eyes. He didn't need an apology, not really. The respect was enough. He reached out and shook her hand, his grip firm but not overpowering. "There's no need for apologies, Princess," he said. "We all have our own strengths. Humanity may not have the most advanced technology, but we have something else that's just as important. We have the will to fight for what's right." Zira nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And that, Captain, is what will make this peace last. You've shown us all that strength isn't just about weapons or technology. It's about conviction. The delegates from both sides began to mingle, some shaking hands, others discussing the finer points of the agreement. The atmosphere in the hall had shifted entirely. What had once felt like a room full of enemies now felt more like a room full of colleagues, each with something to offer, each with something to learn. Rylan looked around at the people in the room. These were the leaders of the galaxy, the beings who controlled the fate of entire worlds. And yet, in this moment, they were no different from the soldiers who fought beside him on the battlefield. They were just people making decisions that would affect the future of countless lives. And in that moment, Rylan realized something important. Humanity's place in the galaxy was not determined by the power of its weapons or the strength of its armies. It was determined by the choices they made, the conviction in their hearts, and the strength to stand firm when the world seemed against them. As the negotiations officially concluded, the delegates made their way to the exit. Rylan felt a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't a victory won by brute force, but by something far more enduring, something that would last long after the final signatures had been signed. It was the victory of humanity's spirit, its unwavering belief in itself. Zira turned to Rylan once more before leaving the hall. "I hope we can work together in the future, Captain," she said, her voice soft but filled with determination. "I have no doubt that humanity will play a significant role in shaping the future of the galaxy." Rylan gave a small nod, his face serious. "I hope so too, Princess. But remember, it's not just about shaping the future, it's about making sure it's one we can all share." With that, Zira turned and walked away, her head held high. Rylan watched her for a moment, then turned to leave the hall himself. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, humanity had a real chance to prove its worth. They had a seat at the table, not because of their technology or their strength, but because of something far more important, their spirit, their resilience, and their determination. Rylan stepped into the corridor, the weight of the day settling over him. He had played his part in this victory, but the work wasn't over. There were still challenges ahead, still battles to be fought, and still doubts to be overcome. But as he walked away from the hall, he knew one thing for certain: humanity was ready. Ready to face the future, ready to stand beside the stars, and ready to show the galaxy that they were more than just survivors. They were humanity, and they were here to stay.